All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Tim and Kari Ramey. It's July 17th, 2024. We're at Zenith Vineyard outside Salem. And thank you both, Tim and Kari, for joining us today. First question to get things started is why wine?
Well, I think we were wine geeks before we were wine industry people. I suppose that's how it usually starts. For us, it started really with a group of friends back in Summit, New Jersey, where we sort of casually suggested to one another, maybe we should take our wine drinking more seriously and form a dinner group, a wine club. And so we did. It was 6 couples. We'd do 6 dinners a year and do these sort of thematic dinners where the host would provide the wines and some write-ups and so on, and do the cooking, and then everybody would split the cost of the wine. So you could go a little nuts. And that group went to Napa together, went to the Willamette Valley together, went to Bordeaux together, went to Chateauneuf-du-Pape together. So we a good bit of our wine knowledge and education came from putting this group together and taking it forward.
So, and from that educational and very much friend and enjoyment standpoint, you were involved in a Wall Street career. And so, so I think a little bit of the backstory that's important is talking about your introduction to Mondavi and beginning to cover the wine industry as an analyst.
Sure. I was a Wall Street analyst for my career for 33 years. And my primary focus was analyzing food companies, things like Kellogg and General Mills and so on. And in 1993, Robert Mondavi Winery came public, and the traditional group of analysts that would have followed that would have been beverage analysts. Those are people who cover Coke and Pepsi and Anheuser, and they weren't that interested in this little Napa Valley winery. And I was, because I was a wine geek, and so I decided wine is pretty close to food.
So important to food.
So I began covering Mondavi, and then Beringer, and then Constellation Brands, and then Brown-Forman, and some others along the way. And so that gave me a good sense of the industry. I became an expert on the industry, even though I wasn't an expert on, say, how to buy a tractor.
So we'll come back up to that in a second. Let's back up for a second. Let's talk about life before wine a little bit. Kari, let's start with you. Tell us about where you're born and raised.
Well, both Tim and I are Seattle kids originally, and we both grew up in the north end of Seattle. We actually met in middle school. We both had independent dating lives, but were very, very good friends. And then fell in love our second year college in a meaningful way, to the point where we were married while we were still students. I was at Seattle Pacific University, Tim was at University of Washington. And so we were very young, had great support from our parents. And so we've just enjoyed our 45th wedding anniversary. And we have 3 children, 3 girls. And they are all married, and we have 5 grandchildren. And everyone is enjoyed wine along the way, and but we have not had our children involved in our wine industry other than coming to volunteering. They all have independent careers and independent lives from ours. So it was a big hike from going from Seattle to New York. But Tim had a really, really interesting job offer in 1985. So we made that big jump and ended up on the East Coast for almost 15 years. So loved it, did a little stint in Chicago. And then our big wine epiphany happened when we had been collecting wine since we had committed to having a beach house out here on the West Coast to stay connected to friends and family. We were coming out to the Willamette, or out to the West Coast, out to the beach in Cannon Beach every summer. And then, of course, on those rainy days, you'd come in to the Willamette Valley and go wine tasting. And at that point, we're talking like 6 wineries. Back in the day, it was Ponzi and Willackenzie and Tory Moore. I mean, Elk Cove. You can name them because we went to them over and over again because that was it. But we had the wonderful chance of meeting Mark Velasic from St. Innocent Winery during one of those journeys, going to the International Pinot Noir Conference. And because of that, while we were on the East Coast, and I guess it was when we were in Chicago, we had an interaction with Mark in about 2002, where he mentioned that this wine that we had been collecting from the O'Connor Vineyard, Pat O'Connor was no longer interested in being here. He had just lost his wife to cancer, and Mark thought that he wanted to sell the property. And since we were at a crossroads with Tim's career, we thought, well, we should just come out and take a look at this vineyard and see if that might be kind of fun. And so we flew out in September of 2002, thanks. And about 3 weeks later, made an offer on the vineyard, and then also, and Mark was part of that decision making. So he was our introduction to the O'Connor Vineyard. He was our consultant as we, went through the purchase process. And then as our lives evolved here, when we purchased this property, there was no wedding and events facility, there was no winery, there was no, it was just the estate house up on the hill. There was a little old red farmhouse that stood in this spot. Pat O'Connor had leased the entire vineyard operation to another winery that was managing it. So really, we were just buying a lovely house on the hill and a beautiful view. And so we knew that we didn't have a huge commitment to a business model until very shortly after that. We decided we had to have a commitment, a very large commitment to a business model, and began kind of scheming about what we were going to do to improve the vineyard, to expand the vineyard. I came up with a groovy idea that I thought a hospitality business would really be an enhancement to our commodity business. Tim was still working as an analyst. He had just switched venues and was working for D.A. Davidson up in Lake Oswego area. So he was still doing his day job. I was here with the kids and horses and dogs and ponies and all that kind of thing. And so I was like, I need to have something to keep myself busy, and let's build a wedding and events business. And so that drove us back to partnering with Mark Velasic, who wanted a vineyard site to have his winery, and off we went.
Tell me about your impressions of Oregon wine before becoming an owner of an Oregon wine or an Oregon vineyard. What did you think about the wine industry here, and what prompted you to want to be part of it?
Well, I would say probably our initial wine epiphanies and loves were Washington State, Bordeaux, more big reds. That's often true. You sort of fall in love with those before you kind of figure out the finesse of Pinot Noir, right? But it really was, kind of in that 93, 4, 5 kind of period where we really got to understand and know Oregon and Oregon Pinot Noir. And really it was Pinot Noir at that point. I've never been a big fan of Pinot Gris. It didn't do anything for me. Chardonnay wasn't really a thing. So it was all about Pinot Noir. As Kari mentioned, we had a dinner party in probably 2001 or 2. I guess it would have been 2002. And we had a double magnum of 1991 O'Connor Vineyard Pinot Noir.
In Chicago.
In Chicago at our house, and served it to a bunch of people who I can't even remember who they were, but I remember the wine. The wine was, spectacular, and I have often made a point of, if something's wonderful, send a thank you note to the winemaker, because winemakers have egos, and it's good to kind of stroke them a bit. But I think I sent an email to Mark raving about this 91 double magnum of O'Connor. I don't even think he answered the email, but he tucked it away in the back of his mind, and this led to that.
So how did the two of you? How did you come to meet Mark? How did you come to want to be partners with him?
Oh, that's a good story. We were at the International Pinot Noir Conference, and we had not paid to be attenders. We were clueless. We had no idea. We literally came into the valley one day when it was cold and murky and foggy out on the coast. Had our family with us, and said, "Oh well, there's this fair going on at Linfield College. Let's go to the fair."
Maybe a wine thing. Yeah,
so we
who knows?
packed the children up and went off to the fair to find out that this was the grand tasting on Sunday, the last day of the Pinot Noir festival, and we're very quickly told, no, you can't. This is a huge thing that's sold out, months in advance. And my brother was with us and happened to recognize one of the volunteers at the gate, and he said, "Oh, hey, so and so, Steve, whatever. Is there any way we can just like pay a day thing?" And Steve said, "Well, there's a whole ton of people from the East Coast that had to leave early today. And so I know this is not oversubscribed. So, hey, how about," what did he say?
$25.
$25. And he goes, "The kids aren't supposed to, come." And we were like, "Oh, no, they're really good at picking up plates and cups. They'll just help bus tables."
So they bus tables.
So I told the children, I was like, "Okay, get going." They're very well trained. Get going, be helpful, and I'm sure they will feed you, And so then we started to go around to this grand tasting and taste Pinot Noirs. And guess what? We picked St. Innocent out of 80 Pinot Noirs that were being poured that day. And I don't even think Mark was there.
He wasn't. We didn't meet him then.
Right, we didn't meet him then, but we were like, we're filing this, we're buying this wine, this is amazing, we love this. And so that started our relationship with Mark Velasic. We contacted him, we said, "Hey, we would love to do a winemaker dinner out at the coast next summer, not this summer, next summer. Our wine club's coming out, would you come out and do a winemaker dinner?" And in those days, the answer was always yes. We also did that with Ken Wright. Tim contacted Ken Wright, said, "Would you come out and do a winemaker dinner in Cannon Beach?" Sure.
See you there.
So there you go. So these are really back in those beginning days when these guys were young and hungry. Mark Velasic had his day job. He was not a full-time winemaker.
He was a PA.
Yeah. And so anyway, so that's how those relationships started. And we just began to build on them. But always with that idea that Oregon is so collaborative, so helpful. And of course it drove, everything that we did after we purchased, the vineyard. We were looking at each other, trying to pinch ourselves going, did that really happen? And Tim kind of said, "What do we do next?" And I said, "I know, you call the neighbors." That's what Dick Ponzi told us. He didn't know what he was doing, so he called the neighbors. So we called Pat and Terry Castile up at Bethel Heights, and we said, "Will you come down?" We've talked to Mark Velasic. "And will you come down and walk the vineyard
Joe
with
Dobbs
us?"
helped us out.
Joe Dobbs helped us out. "And would you come and walk and talk?" And absolutely like that. People showed up. They don't want you to be a bad neighbor. They don't want you to fail. They don't want to put a blight on the neighborhood. And look what happened. I mean, how many wineries were here when we moved in?
There was only 3 or 4. It was Witness Tree, Bethel Heights,
Christum,
and that was about it. Yeah.
Yep.
For this neighborhood. The other kind of origin story that I love to tell, we were at a wine dinner in Chappaqua, New York, and it was a Ponzi wine dinner. Dick Ponzi was there, and he's there looking dapper in his tweed jacket with the elbow patches on, and this
corduroy pants,
and
his hush puppies.
This is Chappaqua, so it's a
shoes.
very Tony,
very buttoned up.
suburb of New York City. And he was presenting his 20th anniversary wine, which was the 1990. We had a bunch of our Wall Street friends there with us, and we kind of went gaga for this wine. I think between that group, we probably bought 5 or 6 cases of this wine. And, it became very memorable. It became a piece of the cellar. Fast forward to their 40th anniversary, we were growing grapes that went into that wine. So there's your 20-year story from, bumping into this guy we've never heard of before named Dick Ponzi to being a part of his 40th anniversary blend.
Oh, and I remember opening a wonderful, I can't remember the year, you can help with that, of the wine that we opened when Louisa was here for the winemaker dinner too.
Yeah, we did a vertical with Luisa Ponzi. We did winemaker dinners for all of our winemakers who made wines from
Zenith Vineyard.
Zenith
grapes.
Vineyard, and one of the things we did one year was a vertical of Ponzi from 1990 to probably 96. That was pretty spectacular and fun to have Louisa narrate that.
So tell me about your first time visiting the property when you were thinking about buying it. What did you see, and what made you think it was something you had to do?
Well, so it was September 10th, 2002, not to be too precise about it, but it was a very memorable, beautiful day, just pre-harvest. I'd spent a lot of time talking to Pat O'Connor, and I'm an analyst, right? I build spreadsheets, I analyze, I do these things. And so I had a pretty good working knowledge of the vineyard, even though I'd never been here. And one of the things that we did was we were staying right up here at the Bethel Heights B&B, and there was some, whispers around the neighborhood, and some of the people couldn't exactly, keep secrets very well. But first thing I did was drive to Albany and get on a plane, a Cessna 172 that had, a Nikon camera mounted in the belly of the plane to take infrared photography. Back in the day, that's what you did. So before I even walked the vineyard, I flew it and did all this imagery that, later proved to be very helpful. And then later that day, Kari and I came to the vineyard. Actually, we were driving around the corner here, and I said, "So that's it?" And Kari said, used a Wall Street term, "Sold to me."
Well, it was not only the vineyard, the beauty of the vineyard, but there's horse stables here, there was horse pastures, there was a big riding arena, and I was riding on the East Coast and then in Chicago, so horses were a passion of mine. And I'd always had them in commercial facilities. I'd never had them at my own property. So I was really enamored with the idea that we were buying this very, very large piece of property with a lot of riding space. And I loved cross-country riding and did fox hunting on the East Coast. So that whole open, vast space just was really, really attractive to me. And it went over really well with my mare when I arrived with her too. So very happy.
We had a kind of an intense weekend with Pat O'Connor, and at the end of the weekend, we kind of indicated, yeah, we're very interested. I'm an analyst. I've still got more work to do, but we almost essentially came to a price at that Sunday meeting at the end of the weekend. And then I said, "There's one contingency. I'm 44 years old. This is going to require some money. I need to find a job here." And I had interviewed with D.A. Davidson on the way down on the Friday. And I said, "I think it's going to take about 3 weeks because, they don't get a lot of guys who spent 15 years in New York that then have corporate experience and so on." And that's about what it took. So.
Luckily, he arrived with a really good resume.
So you mentioned kind of the pinch yourself moment and then the what's next moment. So tell me about what was next. What was the first year like after you owning the vineyard?
So the vineyard, Pat O'Connor started the vineyard in 1982. And as Kari mentioned, his wife Patty passed away in I believe, fall of 2001. And so he was, this was our life's work together, ready to kind of move on. But more importantly, it was probably time for the next round of investment. The vineyard had phylloxera in it. Of course, all that infrared photography definitely showed that. We could see where the phylloxera was. And it was a 60-acre vineyard at the time, but 35 of the 60 acres were on their own roots and infested with phylloxera. So really, we were buying 25 acres that was, going to be ongoing, and the rest was going to be a replant project. And so you asked about the first year. We decided to plant 15 acres in our first year. These were
new acres or replanting?
new acres, acres that had never been planted before. Actually, two of the most prime spots, our Block 8 and our Block 9, had never been planted. And it was like, why? Well, just didn't get around to it. And so I remember, I won't say who, but I remember this was, 2003 now. And it was not a great economy. And the 2002 vintage, which ended up being a phenomenal vintage for Oregon, but the critics hadn't gone gaga on that yet. I remember one wine industry luminary who literally laughed in our face at the idea of this Wall Street guy showing up and planting 15 acres his first year. I'm sure his working assumption was, you'll be gone in about 3 years, and this will be a horrible mistake. And of course, with hindsight, if we could have tripled what we did that first year, it would have been a great idea. So those were good planting decisions, and we kept on. And so now we're 93 acres planted, of which we've planted all but 25.
Tell me about deciding what to plant and where to plant it.
So the vineyard, had a very strong Pinot Noir heritage to it, with good vineyard designated wines being made from it. But like a lot of things, and I think it was true with that whole phylloxera experience, both here and in California, it's a do-over opportunity. They didn't always get it all right the first time. And one of the things I love to point out, Block 1, which is really probably our best block, the rows were paralleling Xena Road, heading, essentially east-west. And the longest one was 1,320 feet long.
And spacing.
And 12-foot wide row spacing.
To handle those giant tractors, the big Holland tractors back then.
And, bottom line, we know now with the correct row orientation was literally 90 degrees off of what it was, which was, we want to be 22 degrees off of north to get a similar amount of sun on the vine, in the morning and the afternoon. So it was a big do-over opportunity. And I took the point of view, some people sort of nurse phylloxerated vineyards along, thinking, maybe I can get one more year out of it. And I never saw the logic to that, because no matter what, you're going to be out of production for 3 years, and if you get it wrong, it might be 4. If you end up having a bad vintage, it might be a 4 or 5 year period. So as quickly as we had the financial resources to do it, we replanted. And that process, the last replanting we did, ended up in probably 2015. So, and the things we've done since then have been, more new fields and new blocks, or grafting over.
Right. Right, lots of iterations of farm management. But I want to interject that along with you're talking about, how do you become farmers when you have zero experience? And one of the things that's super important, as I was talking about Ted and Terry Castile and Joe Dobbs and all the people that are coming to consult on the vineyard, we inherited a wonderful, wonderful man, Pedro Martinez, and Samuel, who Pat O'Connor had kept on, even though the vineyard was being managed by an outside winery. So these two guys Pedro Martinez had been here since he was 14 years old. So when we arrived at the vineyard knowing nothing about actual farming practices, Pedro was here, and he is extremely, extremely good. He's still here. And he's been a amazing member of the community. He was given the Vineyard Manager of the Year award last year. and
Vineyard Excellence Award
Thank you.
by the Oregon Wine Board.
yeah, thank you. So we had this, great opportunity where Tim's expertise on analyzing and looking at data and looking at strategy was married with Pedro saying, yeah, and I need a new tractor, and yeah, I need this, and yeah, I need that. So there was a great synergy that has gone on over time with both Tim and Pedro managing.
I always took the point of view that being a winemaker was definitely skills I did not have.
Right.
And really probably as much art as it is science.
I agree.
Being a vineyard manager, while I don't tell the crew what to do on a day-to-day basis, I do the spray program, I do the contracting, I do all the strategy of
Payroll,
all those things. Those would be things that were all about making a list, checking it twice, and executing. Things that I absolutely could do. So even though I didn't bring any specialized skills to that party, I could figure out what best practices were and go after them. For instance, we decided very early on, without any real outside impetus, we didn't. Pat O'Connor had used Roundup under the vine rose, as everybody did back in that time. Mm-hmm. And when we just looked at it, we said, it's dead, but it's sort of this nasty green slime growing under. The only thing that's left that wasn't killed by the Roundup was this nasty green slime, and I don't like that. I didn't know what it was, but
but it was ugly. Yeah.
So we started doing in-row cultivation when we never used glyphosate in the vineyard ever, because it just seemed like this is we can work around this. There's another way to do this.
Well, and we definitely needed to amend soils, and I started off right away taking a class from USDA on a manure management class. I was putting up new fencing for pasture, for the horse pastures, repairing things that needed to be repaired, and so I went and took a manure management class. I didn't know how to run a farm or run a stable, so I was really learning from the ground up. But when you do that, when you ask for that education, get involved in USDA, they were all about, oh, hey, your waterway, your greenway down there, your riparian waterway is completely eroded with blackberry bushes. There was 30 feet of blackberry bushes on either side of the creekway down there. So we get goats and we start, hand, removing blackberry vines, and that took 10 years. But now we have an incredibly vibrant waterway down there full of, we've got raptors on the vineyard. We have native plants that have been planted along the waterway. The blackberries have, been, beaten into submission. They will never be gone, but because you do all understand that they are underneath us and around us everywhere. So they are the net system underneath the soil. But yes, it's a constant management of more than just even the vineyard. It's everything that we have in the viticulture here around.
Yes, in the end, it'll just be blackberries and cockroaches.
Right.
We do understand that, and the rats. And the rats.
So you mentioned obviously that it's taking some time and taking some training. So at what point did you feel like you kind of had a grasp on what it took to run the space, what it took to be a farmer, what it took to kind of get everything where you wanted it to be?
Well, so we didn't actually take over the day-to-day operation of the existing vineyard until 2005. So the first 3 years were under contract to a third party. So that gave us a little time to learn stuff. Mm-hmm. And really, I would say by the time 2006 rolled around, we had figured out a lot of what it took to be vineyard managers. Did we make some mistakes? Maybe not critical ones, but things that we might have done differently if we had the opportunity to do it again. But ultimately, I think we have been very happy with the decisions we've made in the vineyard. And as Kari mentioned, the really big decision was in about 2006, 2007 to build this 28,000 square foot facility. Mm-hmm. together.
2004, we decided to do it, and we were completing it in 2006 to 2008.
Right.
So
We actually got a winery license or a winery permit to build the winery in 2004, and our initial, kind of went to Polk County and said, hey, we're thinking about this thing, and we described it as maybe 7,000 square feet. Then by the time we got other advice and decided to build a substantial winery alongside it, it grew to 28,000 square feet. But they kind of rolled with that. We remember as I went in to pay for and pick up the building permits for this, I wrote them a check for like $30,000. And the clerk said, this is the biggest check we've ever received. And it's like, good for you. It was a great decision to make at the time. Today the replacement cost of this building would be, 2.5 times what we paid to build it. So again, sometimes better to be lucky than smart. However, I will say we went from construction financing to permanent financing in June of 2008 for this building. And if you remember anything about the economy during that period of time, it was getting really bad. And by August and September, banks were failing. And we would never, if we'd been 3 months later, I don't think we would have been able to get permanent financing at all. So a little serendipity. Of course, that meant that our very first year of operations was end of 2008, 2009, which was not a robust year for anything. But we were starting from zero, so we really didn't know,
It's interesting that, as we were evolving, you were talking about how did you start to feel like farmers. When you feel like you're really investing in a project, and this is not just going to be a short-term thing, this is going to be a lifetime thing. And we felt very invested emotionally as well as financially. Both of us just felt like this is it. This is like the one thing we can really sink our teeth into. This is not just a job. Mm-hmm. This is a passion, a career. And Tim was like, wow, I can actually see us retiring here, and this is like a forever project. And, even when I'm finished, doing my, analyst job, and I thought, we can't retire on a commodity business. This is like, you can't just retire on grapes. That's just too scary. It's too volatile. One thing I had learned from hanging out with a Wall Street guy. So I was like, we need to build more layers of income into this business. So really that whole driving idea of, hey, we really should have a winery here, and then we should have an event business here, a hospitality business. All of that began to ferment and then start to take shape about the time when we were like, this is it. This is a forever thing.
And I should say, at the time we got the permit, Polk County should not have given us the permit. At that time, wineries couldn't even plug in a stove. We built a commercial kitchen, and so
two, one in the winery and one in the building.
How that was approved, we'll never know. And we were extremely naive. We had no idea that there was sensitivity about
size
and about event facilities. Mm-hmm. And I won't say which neighbor, but there was a neighbor who was sort of agitating against it. And we ended up having a meeting with them and kind of saying, hey, we're hearing that you're kind of, advocating a no event facility kind of thing. And they said, well, you actually did everything right. You have great setbacks from the road. You have, none of your neighbors are negatively impacted. You paved your roads. You don't have dust. You have plenty of parking. You have ADA. We did all the right things. But they were alluding to a facility that was on a 5-acre lavender farm that was definitely negatively impacting its neighbors and how that needed to be regulated. So In 2011, there was a move to rewrite the winery legislation, which meant that I needed to be in Salem every afternoon for committee meetings for about 3 weeks, just sort of protecting our right to be what we are. And ultimately we did. We got essentially a grandfather clause that says you were properly permitted at the time, and so you're forever permitted to do what you're doing, but you couldn't build this today given the regulatory framework.
So I want to talk about this building kind of in two parts. Let's start with the winery, and you mentioned the partnership with Mark. So let's talk about how the winery came about and the partnership with Mark came about.
Kari made that introductory call, as she alluded to that, but picked up the phone and called Mark, and we had known that Mark was interested in buying Seven Springs Vineyard. A lot of people were at the time. And, Mark felt a little bit naked that he didn't have any ownership of vineyards. He was 100% purchased fruit. And also wanted to put a winery in the country rather than, his previous winery at that time was in an industrial, part over by Home Depot on Cherry Avenue. So Kari approached him and said, well, why don't we partner together? And ultimately in 2006, we did. St. Innocent became a 25% owner of Zenith, but as importantly, we approached the building of this building almost like a condominium where Mark was responsible for and funded the winery side, and we were responsible for and funded the event side, but it's all one building and all one financial structure. Ultimately, Mark decided he wanted to downsize and have a generational shift past the business on to his next generation. And so in 2017, much to our surprise, we didn't expect this to happen, but he said, hey, we would entertain an offer to buy out our portion. We had actually planned to build a different building. We had financing in place. We had everything all lined up. We were going to build a 10,000 square foot wine storage facility to essentially have commercial wine storage on the property. And we called our banks and said, hey, what if we made a little shift here and did this slightly different thing? And they were supportive. And so, again, within 2.5 months of having that, we would entertain a buyout offer. We completed a deal to buy St. Innocent out and become 100% owners of Zenith. We didn't necessarily know what the heck we were going to do with the winery facility, and it just turned out that Aaron Jordan of Fela was looking for an Oregon facility, and so we signed a 5-year lease with him. So it went from being a partnership with St. Innocent to a lessee-lessor relationship with Fela. And so really, when that 5-year lease ran its course, ending in April of 2023.
And Aaron purchased his own vineyard.
And Aaron bought his own vineyard up in Gaston. We didn't ever operate the tasting room or the winery. And so we've been doing that now a sum total of 15, 16 months. So, and it kind of was like another, okay, are we ready to sign up for the next big thing? Because this is another big step. We are a custom crush facility. We have 9 custom crush clients. And because it's a pretty big, it's a 17,000 square foot winery. And Zenith had never been more than a 400 or 500 case brand, but it was also only really focused on selling to our events. Now we actually operate a tasting room and a direct-to-consumer, and we, for the first time, offered a wine club. I mean, we might be a little late to the party, but but it just was because the business changed.
Curious about you mentioned the relationship with Mark, the kind of condominium you mentioned, the kind of condominium style you mentioned. It's kind of a unique setup. I'm curious how that worked out and how I guess sort of what it was like having a sort of tenant, sort of co-owner next door in your winery.
It was mostly good. There were some moments of tension here and there.
It's not like you guys aren't both strong personalities.
Yeah, we're
right?
both
we're
type
we're
A's.
all strong personalities.
Carrie's
We
a
all
type
know
A.
what we're doing. We all know what we're doing. We all can be in charge. So
Yeah. So there was some of that, but Mark has a reputation of being a strong, assertive personality. But I will also say he's a great human being. There was never any question of his integrity and what he brought to the party from that standpoint. And so we might clash over something, but there was never a distrustful or it was always a reasonable relationship. We appreciate that about Mark. We learned a lot from Mark.
Mm-hmm. Very much.
The other part of this, obviously, you mentioned the event space, and you mentioned this as a way to diversify in the early days. Tell me about the vision for this space and kind of initial intent versus what it grew up to be.
Well, the initial intent is kind of what got built, so that's you're looking at it. I think that the search for an architect was something that was a little bit unusual in that we kind of started to look at Oregon winery construction and architecture at the time, which is, again, you're going back to 2004, 2005. And everybody was building sheds, It was all very contemporary. And my vision for having a hospitality space was very much more old world, something that really looked like it belonged in the country, that had organically grown here. And so ultimately we were at that point, talking with Mark about what we wanted to build, and he liked the idea also. I mean, Mark, if anything, is very much of a Francophile, and so he loves that old world look. And so we ended up hiring an architect that was a friend of ours from New Jersey. And so that part was, again, Mark had complete autonomy for the vision for the winery and wanted a more contemporary structure in there, and obviously in the barrel room down underneath the floor here. But everything that you see here was definitely, when I talked to our architect, Greg Comito from Comito and Associates in New Jersey, I just said, look, Greg, I'm looking for like a country club. I want it to look like an East Coast country club, and I want it to look like it's always been here. And so he said, no problem. I mean, obviously, we talked the same language. We'd done a lot of house renovations. Both of us had worked on historical homes on the East Coast. Tim and I did a lot of different housing projects, mostly all with period houses where we were restoring and renovating, updating houses. And Greg Comito was also doing that. So we had a very easy language to fulfill. He did have an international architect's license that was refused in the state of Oregon, so he had to come out here and sit for his architectural license to be able to do this. So that was a little hoop that we jumped through. The fountain that you see out in front of the building was supposed to be a very small, very cute fountain that people could play in, like in Friends, put the couch in there, take a photo kind of thing. Perrierdale informed us that they didn't have enough water in their water system to put out our fire with our sprinkler system, that we could build our own fire suppression system. So that's 250,000 gallons of water out there to have that kind of infrastructure. So there was a lot of detail and decision making and a little pain and strain along the way to get this, to fruition. But really the vision, I think, was very copacetic from the outset.
Really, I mean, there were three key designers of the building. Greg Comito designed the exterior envelope and the engineering effectively. Mark Velasic designed the workflow of the winery. It's a gravity flow winery, 4 levels. And Kari really designed the look and feel of the interior, at least in the event spaces. Mark did the look and feel of the winery space.
And it's worked really well. I mean, wow, we've done over 1,000 events at this point. So this whole concept has really worn really well over time, which is great.
Very few things that we would do differently too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. Normally you think, well, we should have built more of X, and maybe a little more storage space. But even so, right now, I don't know that we've kind of, we don't need some of those things that we would store. So.
So tell me about what it's like to. You mentioned obviously when it was opened, it was not a great time for getting a lot of events here. So tell me, as it grew and as you started getting more and more events, what is it like being a host venue, and what did you have to learn about, I guess, having weddings here, having proms here, things like that?
Well, we had, from the outset, I was extremely confident. I know it was a financial, scary thing to do. But from the outset, because of our time in California, there was nothing like this in the Willamette Valley. And so I looked at Tim and I was like, if you build it, they will come. I mean, there is just no place to have large events in the Willamette Valley that are actually in a vineyard setting. At that point, Domaine Serene had not been built. We were talking about big. Yeah. So there's, none of that had happened yet. So this was really.
Or Abbey Road.
Or Abbey Road. Yeah. Anyway, get back to my train of thought. So it was a very organic thing for me to say, I have no doubt that this will be a big success. Now, I had never run large events before. I knew that I needed a catering partner. So we began to interview wedding planners and catering companies and started to talk about partnerships so that we could have that kind of input with experience in this business. So we ultimately chose to partner first with Vibrant Table Catering in Portland, who I'm sure everyone is very familiar with. They're just, continue to be one of the top event coordinators and wedding services and event services in the state of Oregon. They were amazing. They came in and told me what furniture to build. They did the design on that commercial kitchen so that we put in all the bells and whistles that would, accommodate a really high-end event. They helped us with the square footage on how much event space we needed, so as well as wedding planners. So both Gene Mattson from Willoughby's Catering, Kurt Bedell, and Art Fortuna from Vibrant Table Catering were really integral in helping us do the guts of how to put this building together. So and then they were our catering partner for the first 10 years, and they were exclusive to this venue. So I got a huge amount of experience from working with those people in the top industry. Now we're a little bit more diverse. We have additional catering companies that we work with, so we have a little bit more confidence that we can be flexible. But at the beginning, they were absolutely key in making sure that we, drove the business to this venue.
What was the biggest thing you didn't know about hosting a large event?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question, Rich. I would just say the overall staffing. That caterers cook good food, but you have got to have that banquet captain, that really good bartender, the servers that know what they're doing. They're not stumbling around trying to figure out where your equipment is or, where the dish is or, how to be quiet during a ceremony. These are people that are well versed. And so that when our clients come to look at our venue, they're just looking at the ambiance. They're just saying, I got to have this. This is lovely. They have no idea of how much work and manpower goes into actually executing an event. So I was responsible for the ambiance, but all these other team members are responsible for actually executing each event, because at the end of the day, it only matters, what your last review was. Did it go well? Was it on time? Did everybody have a great time? Did those, maybe, people that had a little bit too much to drink, were they quietly, taken care of behind the scenes, and there was no obvious disruption to somebody's vision of a perfect event day? So all those little things go on behind the scenes, and they really are important.
We've all heard horror stories about hosting weddings, and almost without fail, every story we heard from Oregon wine country was, weddings are horrible. We tried a few, but we don't do it anymore. They're really difficult. And what we learned was this is a issue of expectations management. Mm-hmm. So a bride walks in and decides they want to get married at, XYZ Vineyard. and falls in love with the inherent beauty of the vineyard. Doesn't necessarily think about what happens if it rains, doesn't necessarily think about where will she put on her dress, does she have to use a porta potty with a wedding dress on, where will people park.
How will grandma get to the ceremony site?
Exactly.
You know?
And so there's so many things that are really detail oriented that the average winery has no capacity to execute on. And so they have negative feelings about weddings because they get negative feedback because they didn't meet expectations, even though the expectations were probably unreasonable on the part of the bride. But we have a pretty good ability. We understand what the expectations are likely to be. We understand how to meet expectations and exceed them. And so we don't have a lot of people that go away mad that say, you know, you aren't what we thought you were. Pretty much what you see is what you get at Zenith Vineyard.
So talk about the vineyard again for a second. You mentioned obviously the growth and how much you've put into the vineyard. So tell me about as it's grown. Tell me about the strategy behind it. What has been added outside of Pinot Noir and why, I guess, and
Sure.
And sort of the kind of the overall growth pattern of the vineyard.
Woke up to the fact that Oregon Chardonnay can be pretty special. When we bought the vineyard, there was 13, 14 acres of Chardonnay, but it was clone 108 Chardonnay on its own roots. So all that went away, unfortunately. And at one point, we only had 1 acre of Chardonnay. Now we're up to, I think, 14 acres. And Chardonnay is, in my view, as exciting a story in Oregon as exists. Sparkling is a really exciting story too, and sparkling is another category that just was not a thing back when we started. Now we've planted some Pinot Meunier. It's not in production yet, but it's for our sparkling wine clients. If we had some of the stuff we planted in 2022. Our last bit of 5.7 acres, if we'd had the conversation 10 years before, I would have said, those are not really plantable acres. You know, there's some valley floor, flatland, and then this is a really beautiful hillside, but unfortunately it's north facing. And, you know, we became converted to the idea of planting Gamay on the flatland, does just fine with that. And planting Pinot Meunier and Chardonnay on the north-facing hillside, because guess what? That'll go to a sparkling wine client who will love the fact that it gets more hang time. So those are some of the lessons we've learned. We also learned that Pinot Gris is not the most economically viable varietal. We don't get paid very much for Pinot Gris, and we had about 7 acres of Pinot Gris when we bought the vineyard. Ironically, that was all perfectly fine on rootstock, and so,
Indestructible.
so you know, a quarter of the vineyard that was the legacy was Pinot Gris. Now we've grafted over all but 1 acre of that to Chardonnay and a little bit of Tempranillo. Tempranillo was a kind of a strange story. In that very first year, 2003, I'm out, you know, buying whatever it was, 40,000 plants or something. And I bought, you know, 600 Tempranillo vines. I don't know why, you know, for no apparent reason.
But we wanted another varietal from Pinot Noir.
We had...
We were going to have a wedding business.
The story that we probably have adhered to on that is we liked the Syrah that Witness Tree and Christum grew. And so warm climate grapes grown in a cool climate, I think are pretty special. I think they can have high acidity, be very racy, have incredible flavor profiles. And so we said, it's a little bit of stuff. It's a third of an acre. You know, if it doesn't work out, we can graft it over to something else later.
Experiment.
And for a while, Mark Vlasic referred to it as that goddamn Tempranillo, because the winery would be clean and done, and then it would be like, is it time to bring the Tempranillo in now? And So it would be the thing that would mess up his winery. But ultimately, we really liked what it did. And when we figured out not to make it like Pinot Noir, but to make it like Tempranillo, it ended up being an extremely successful wine. And so now we have 4 acres of Tempranillo. Another oddball variety, we inherited a 0.6 acre block of Auxerrois. Had no idea what it was. Pat O'Connor had worked with David Adelsheim to plant a proportional amount of Auxerrois and Pinot Blanc for Adelsheim. And the idea was David wanted to use these 2 grapes that are frequently blended together in Alsace for Adelsheim. And so we had these 2 blocks, no idea what the Auxerrois was. But over time, we began to really appreciate it. We actually did a dinner where, again, invited a bunch of winemaker friends, including David Adelsheim and Eugenia Keegan, and a bunch of other people who we respected. And I'd collected 28 different Auxerrois from around the world. And it was like, let's figure out what this varietal is and what it could be, should be. And so that kind of created a strategy of, we want to make it in a dry style. We don't want a residual sugar wine. But we loved what it does. And so now...
Barrel? The big barrel treatment?
Yeah, we fermented in barrels, neutral oak. And so that's become a really important wine for us. Another sort of quirky story also harkens back to Mark Vlasic, but the 2011 vintage, which was a cold, late vintage. And Mark had some fruit from Momtazi, some Pinot Noir from Momtazi, that was up on a cold, windswept ridge, and the leaves had fallen off, and it wasn't ripe, and it wasn't going to get ripe because there's no leaves anymore. And so Mark, being the enterprising winemaker, says, well, we'll make a white Pinot Noir. And so I'm tasting with him from Tank one day, and he goes, I made this, I don't know, we'll sell it out of the tasting room, I don't know, white Pinot Noir. And at that point, we had nothing with the residual sugar, and our event customers, our brides, were asking for it. We were like, you know what? We maybe should think about giving them what they want. So I tasted this with Mark, and I said, how much of this have you got? He said, I got 150 cases or something. I said, I'll buy it all from you right now. And we ended up buying some. He made some for the St. Innocent label.
We sold 10 cases the first week.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like incredibly popular.
We just called it a bride wine. It was like, it was just made everybody so happy.
We ended up naming it White Veil. It has a
bride veil on it, yes.
Bride bodice and veil and so on the label, and it's very pretty. And it continues to be one of our major best sellers.
And guess what? All the wineries making white Pinot Noir now.
Yeah.
What do you do with slightly early or underripe Pinot Noir grapes? Make some white Pinot Noir.
Yeah, I mean, you pick it at the same time you would pick for sparkling. So, yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the area as it was when you got here. Tell me a little bit about the growth of the Willamette Hills and I guess the Oregon wine industry in general.
Yeah, well, so again, it's sort of sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. This was not a strategy to locate at O'Connor Vineyard. It was the only vineyard we ever looked at.
It's not like we shopped.
It's not like we shopped, but we ended up here, and number one, I think, it would be a very reasonable, defensible statement that with hindsight, being in the Willamette Hills is a spectacular decision, whether it was lucky or smart, and being right here in the Willamette Hills, where we have world-class wineries all within a 2-mile radius of us. You go up the hill, Walter Scott, world-class, Bethel Heights, world-class, Bryn Mawr, world-class, Bjornson. Well, I'm just driving up the road. Temperance Hill, which is not a winery, but is a world-class vineyard. We have insanely good neighbors. And None of that existed back in 2002 when, only Bethel Heights. And of course we couldn't, Bethel Heights, we loved Bethel Heights, but I would say, and I don't think they would disagree, it was probably a B+ at that point, And next generation, Ben Castile takes over the winemaking, and he's knocking the cover off the ball. Those are A+, world-class Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays. So it really helps to have great neighbors.
And when we started out, there was no tasting fees. Everything was free. So
Mark resisted a tasting fee forever.
Everybody resisted it. So it was like, and Kari, Miss Entrepreneur, marketing person, we've been in California, right? And we're like, you guys are crazy. You can't just give this stuff away. People go out to wine country to spend the entire day. So you've got to have some kind of nominal tasting fee going on. And oh no, we can't do that. Nobody will come. Nobody will come if you charge them money. And then, the conversation continued, and it was like, okay, if we can have a neighborhood consortium that everyone is going to charge $5 for a tasting fee.
That was not per se a price-fixing allegation that Kari just made.
It was a place to begin.
Neighborhood agreement.
It was a place to begin. So we did. And so yeah. So now you can see where our price points are at with tasting, bottle prices, all the things that evolved from the time that we started it is just an explosion of popularity, of integrity,
One of the things that was kind of a head turner for me. I happened to be we spent almost a full day in an all-day off-site board retreat. I'm the president of the Yosemite Hills AVA, and one of the things we did in this pretty valuable day was when we reviewed some of the research that the Willamette Valley Wineries Association had just presented, and just a head snapper bit of information. The biggest negative from their research for visiting Oregon was PDX, not the airport, but the city. And I had spent the past 22 years, having somewhat of an inferiority complex of Dundee and Yamhill Carlton, and those places are closer to Portland, and so therefore advantaged, and they certainly were for a long time. But it's kind of an interesting, all right, what if Portland's not a positive attribute? We're not Portland, we're ex-PDX here.
And we now have international flights coming into Salem, so yeah. So there's some really good satisfaction in feeling that this area has done nothing but improve.
So yeah, we didn't understand it at the time, but the acidity, the structure, the incredible depth of flavor that really comes from the huge diurnal cycle of temperature in the Yosemite Hills. If you drive from here to the ocean, it's only 40 miles as the crow flies, and the highest point on that road is only 600 feet. Go across the Coast Range, up Highway 26, that's 1,600 feet. So we have way more marine influence on a daily basis. And we hear about that when we are working with, planning weddings. It's going to be 95 on a hot August day, and I'm having my wedding. What do I do? We're like, yeah, it's going to be 95 at 4 in the afternoon, but by 7, it's going to be blowing 15 or 20 miles an hour, and it'll be 75.
Really, that wind usually starts up about 4.
Yeah.
It really does. It's usually very breezy, so it's very comfortable. I've definitely sat out here for weddings and thought that I was going to be hot, and with that dry wind going on, you're just not. It's very comfortable. So, and then the cooling is just exponential after the sun goes down.
Yeah, easily a 30-degree daily swing. And we're right in the teeth of the Van Duzer.
So what comes next for Oregon wine? You mentioned all the changes. What's next for the neighborhood, and what's next for the Oregon wine industry?
Well, so expanding on what the Willamette Valley Wineries Association did in very good research, was the fact that we may flatter ourselves that we're in the Yosemite Hills or we're in Dundee or we're in Yamhill Carlton, but around the country, the only thing people really know is Willamette Valley,
And that's been a struggle.
yeah. So we have to, find a way to tell that story a little bit better, and I think proliferation of AVAs should be largely done. What will it matter if there's a new AVA, 30 miles south of here?
Right, and creating minutia just is confusing.
Right. So I think there's still a lot of work to go ahead. The tremendous advantage that we have, and we didn't talk about the serendipity of having bought this place in 2002, and then the movie Sideways comes out in 2004. All of a sudden, and I'm friends with the Mondavis, and I'm talking to Mike Mondavi about it. I said, this is just bizarre, the explosion in Pinot Noir. And he said, well, Tim, what it did is it taught 50 million people how to say Pinot Noir. And if you don't know how to say it, you'll never order it. And there's a lot of truth to that. So Oregon has had this tailwind of Pinot Noir and now Chardonnay really going since 2004, which was also about the time the reviews were hitting for the 2002 vintage, which was exceptional. So we have quality, and we have a focus on elevated wines. There is very little lower tier wines that are being produced in the Willamette Valley. It just doesn't really work economically, number one, but it's great that all of our peers are focused on producing super high end wines. So I think the big trend in the wine industry, if you were an analyst following the wine industry, the inexorable trend of the last 20 years is premiumization. I mean, it used to be that the low end was $5. Now the low end is $15, and 20 and above is really where all the growth is happening, and that plays, I think, to Oregon's strengths as well. So we're excited. It's the continuation of a strong trend.
Yes.
And what about what's next for the two of you and for this space? So anything on the horizon, personally or professionally, that you're excited about?
Well, we have it's really amazing team that we're building, and these guys are still new. I mean, everybody from our winemaker, assistant winemaker, DTC, hospitality manager are basically working, in their first or second years of employment here. So our whole model has gotten more sophisticated, and we're just growing that model, but we're feeling really, really confident with what we've set up so far. So as we grow our hospitality industry, we have people staying here on the vineyard. We have another house out at the coast, as we had alluded to earlier. So we just exit stage left and have sleep at the coast, and spend a little bit of time during the week so we could meet with you guys at the vineyard. But really, we're setting ourselves up so that there is less day-to-day supervision on the vineyard and more of it remote, and then we are confident that our team's going to execute everything, beyond our wildest expectations. We just had a music day on Sunday, which I never would have done. I would have thought if we didn't have a wedding on Sunday, it should be a day off. And instead, Dana decided that we were going to do a music festival. So we had 300 people here for a music festival, and it was fabulous. And Tim and I actually came and attended, and it was really, really fun, energetic, and something that was out of my box, something I wouldn't have done. And so we can already see the fruition of just the expansion of what our initial vision entailed, and let some other people really
bring their creativity,
really shine and bring their blue ribbon to the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that Kari and I were sitting here, and we had really no idea about the event. It was not planned
We
by us
attended.
at all.
We
were
attended.
attendees.
We got in free.
And just let our team kind of create it and run with it, and they
was
did
a
an
blast.
exceptional job.
It was really fun.
Last question for the two of you. What are you proudest of? What's your greatest achievement?
I've always said, and I think we have this on our website somewhere, so you could quote it there, but our job as wine growers is to leave this place better, more productive, more beautiful, more pristine than it was when we found it. We are caretakers only of Zenith Vineyard. Somebody else will follow us. And our job is to make everything about it better. And I'm pretty happy with what we've done, but there's still a lot to do.
You could feel really good when, and again, I think the feeling that we had on Sunday, being here at the event, letting our team do, what they were doing, and just it's like proud parents. You sort of sit back and like they get it. Our daughters were here; they brought their friends. It's just that feeling that what we saw when I drove up the road and said "sold to me" is actually coming to fruition, and it's way beyond my manipulation on a daily basis. It has gotten bigger and better, and as Tim was saying, that's what you want in life. You want to be able to look back and say, it is something that it will grow beyond our wildest expectations. So, and still makes us smile on a daily basis. We like hard work. We're good at hard work. And so I think that that's a gift, to be able to get up every day and say, I've got something to do. I can add value. This is really interesting. And then go to bed at the end of the day and say, wow, and look at all the things that everybody else brought to the table too.
Excellent. All the questions that I have for the two of you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't cover that you wanted to cover here today?
I think I'd be pretty happy with that being our story.
Happy, yeah. We'll play it back and see where we messed up.
Well, sold to me then. I'm happy.
Sold to you.
I'm happy if you're happy.
Thank you for your help.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both so much for your time and sharing your beautiful space and story with us. We appreciate it, and we'll let you off the hook.
Terrific, thank you.